Do you want to start with Inside Daisy Clover?
Do you?
I know that's going back, but I was
Boy.
curious about your first meeting with Alan. I understand it was in the
Yeah.
dressing room at Barefoot in the Park. Is that the first time you actually met him?
No, the first time I met him, he was a producer on Broadway before he went into film. And he had produced a show on Lorette Taylor. And I became aware of him at that time as a very, very young, he always looked like a kid, you know. He had a very young countenance. And I was aware that somebody that young could be a producer. That was my first impression of him. And then that went away until it came time that he and Larry Terman got into film as partners. And they were going to do Inside Daisy Clover. And so the question came up about homosexuality because the character was kind of written as a homosexual. He was supposedly patterned after Montgomery Clift, who appeared to be on one side a very romantic character, on the other side there was a darker side. And I said, well, I don't think I'm the right guy for that. I was in a Broadway show at the time, and I said, I don't think I'm the right guy for that, but if you made it more complicated, where it was really about narcissism and ego, where the character I would play would go either way just to get attention, to get love. He'd go either way. He wasn't just one way. He would go any way. He was about being loved by everybody and giving nothing in return. I said, that would interest me. They agreed. So we made the film, and I played that character with that in mind, with Natalie Wood. What happened where things went awry with Allan and myself, and Bob Mulligan, who was the director, I had a lot of high regard for both of them, was that when the film was finished, they decided they should push it over in one direction to make it more controversial, to make it more shocking. Because I guess the reaction to the film was sort of mediocre, so they wanted to jack it up. I wasn't aware of this, so they decided to put a line in the film where I think a woman says, "Don't you know he's gay?" Something like that.
Or you like young boys or something?
Something I can't remember. It was a long time ago. And I didn't know this. And when I saw it, I was pretty upset. I said, why didn't you just tell me? You know, why did you have to sneak that in? It was a real issue that took a while to resolve, but it finally did. I don't think the film went anywhere. I don't think it had much traction. But that started things off on kind of what I would call a wrong track. And then over time, that got resolved and I forgot about it. And so when it came time for All the President's Men, I had gone to other directors who were turning it down.
Which ones? I think Kazan and Friedkin.
Kazan turned it down because he said he just couldn't, he didn't want to get into that territory. And also he didn't like the script. So that was that. And then I also went to Friedkin because I thought he would jack it. I thought, you don't want this just to be a film about words. You want some guts and some emotionality in it. And I thought Friedkin could do that. He turned it down, said he just wasn't interested. So then I thought of Allan, because I knew Allan was smart, and I knew that he was political enough to know what both sides would be like, and that he was interested, he was an intellectual, basically, who was interested in words and so forth. So I went to Allan, and that developed into a partnership. And then we had to enter the second phase of that since I decided on Allan, because I thought he was right. He and I spent enough time together for me to be sure of that. Then the next question was, can we convince the Post to get approval? And that was the next hurdle.
Before we get to further into detail on the film, Clute and Parallax View, were either of those two films, did you use that as references to why you wanted to hire Allan as well?
No, it had nothing to do with those two. He had offered me Clute, and I can't remember why at the time I had turned that down, but that had nothing to do with it. It was really just more of a personal feeling about the kind of person he was and where his mind went, and it seemed to be in the right direction, so that's how it started.
So when you went and got Allan for the film, I know there were script issues right off the bat. William Goldman had handed in a script and there was issues with it, that Allan wasn't happy with it. I think you were having some issue as well. So take us through the process. What happened there?
Well, that was tough because Bill Goldman and I had a personal relationship that went back to Butch Cassidy. And we had family connections that were close and so forth. So the issue was about how much time he had spent on the subject and whether he'd really dug deep enough, whether he'd really spent enough time to get deep enough into it. And so there was a contest there, and Pakula felt, and I agreed to a degree, that he hadn't gone deep enough and he'd done it too quickly and had been too glib in his treatment of it. And so I happened to, as fond as I was of Bill, I had to agree with that. And so when he was asked to do another version, he was slightly offended by that. Also, he was doing another movie at the same time.
Marathon Man?
Yeah, I think. And that that was a problem for me, because I felt this project needed full attention. Anyway, he wrote a second draft that was not well received. And when it got to the post, which it got to surreptitiously, we weren't supposed to turn it over until we were satisfied, but somehow it got to Bradley at the post, and they were deeply offended by it. So they came out publicly against it, so we were in the hole to begin with, and we had to move on. And because we couldn't get anyone else involved, then Alan and I decided that since we were so deeply invested in it, and we both shared the same purpose, that we would take it over, which led to the script eventually being made out of notes of Woodward and Bernstein, that we got together with Woodward and Bernstein, who were both very cooperative at that time, not in the beginning. And they said, okay, we wanted the truth. We said, we just want to know what the truth is about what you guys did and how you did it and how difficult it was and so forth. But we don't want to rely on anybody else when you're the guys that did it. So therefore, can we work with you? They said yes. And they were kind enough to give us their notes. And in their notes was the basis for the screenplay. So we built the screenplay off of their notes.
I understand you were holed up, I guess, in the Madison Hotel. Is that where it was?
Yeah, they're in Madison, yeah, right across the street, which was difficult because the Post was very paranoid. And they thought, oh, this is Hollywood coming into the picture. You know, they had already seen an advanced script, and they decided it was Hollywoodized. That made them even more sure that they should never agree to this. So we had to spend a month going back and forth to the Post, working the people there, trying to convince them that we were legitimate, that we would honor the code that they had set about. But it took a long time because there was a lot of paranoia.
Tell us about Alan as a writer. I know we're going to get to him as a director soon, but as a writer, how was he?
Well, I think Alan as a writer, you had to include him as a director. He directed like a writer. In other words, he had such value for writing because he had started with playwrights and so forth. So he had huge value for playwriting and therefore the role that writers play to a project. And that appealed to me because I felt that this was going to be a movie that words were going to be very, very important. And also it would require a certain intellect that I thought Alan had. So that's how it came to be.
People call him sort of like a psychologist of the cinema.
Yeah, he's very much about it's like he had been so analyzed that and I hadn't been. So that made it an interesting combination. You know?
What was that about? Because I've read that you got a kick out of how he would always break people down by their...
Well, he would try to break me down too, you know, because he was just like, question. You say, wait a minute. How many questions you can ask him? Am I on a couch or are we just talking as partners? And he would laugh and he said, look, that's in my DNA. I'm fascinated by psychology. I said, so are you going to apply that to this project? He said, probably. I said, well, you know, that's probably good. It's probably good. Just stay away from me, okay? I had originally been interested in Al Pacino, and just because of his quality as an actor and the kind of a dark depth to his work. And because I had met Bernstein and Woodward, and that's a whole other story about what my first impressions were of them, Bernstein required a certain kind of sensibility. You know, he was Jewish, and he was slightly sensitive about that. On the other hand, he was really smart, and he had an emotional underpinning. And I thought that needed to come through. Woodward was just the opposite. He was a Republican, and he was bland by self-description. He was bland. He came from the Midwestern family. Father, I think, was a judge. And what interested me in the beginning was how these two guys who were so opposite worked together. They had to work together to get to the truth. And I thought, well, That's interesting. How did they do that, considering they were so different, so opposite, and apparently didn't much like each other, and did not have a lot of respect for each other's work, but they were forced together to work on this story that Ben Bradley and I think it was Rosenthal put them in. And that, to me, was the core of wanting to make the movie, about their relationship, not about what came, not about Nixon. History would take care of that, which it did. But this was about the story nobody knew about. That's what always interests me. What's the story underneath the story you think you know? And that was embodied by the two characters. So I spent a lot of time with both characters. It took a long time. I don't know if we have time for this, but it took a long time to gain their confidence. When I first had the idea, I was making The Way We Were in New York, upstate New York. And when there was an article that appeared, when this whole thing hit big time about Watergate, they were considered not villains, but not to be taken seriously. Who were these two guys that were making this claim? And the claims that they were making were very much against what the big news stories were. And because I had already had a predisposition against Nixon because something happened when I was a child.
So the tennis, was it a tennis trophy or something you received?
It was a sports trophy when I was about 13. And it had to do with just personality. It had to do with vibes. And he was there as a senator from California. Earl Warren was the governor. And I didn't know about politics. I didn't care. You know, they were just a bunch of guys in suits that sounded boring to me. But when he came to give me the award, he gave the award to all the young boys that were getting different awards. I just remember feeling like a vibe. It was a very, very negative vibe. I said, ooh, I get a bad vibe on this guy. Something not straight, something not truthful, something wrong. Then I kind of forgot about it. But I remember having that vibe. So when it came time to make this movie years later, that vibe was haunting me. I thought, well, I have to be careful of that because that means I'm predisposed against the man, and that won't fly. So I have to trust someone else. So Woodward and Bernstein were the two guys that people weren't listening to. They were the only guys working on something that was going to expose a negative side of the president, who was very popular at that time. And his paranoia was very exposed at the same time. He was against the press. He was particularly against the Post, and therefore he was going to be really against these guys, and they knew it. And they knew they would be under investigation if they started going after him, so they had to compile all this stuff secretly. And that interested me. So when this thing hit the big time around Segretti's Dirty Tricks campaign, suddenly this whole thing came up about, wait a minute, there's something going on here. Now, who are the guys? And there was a side article that said, who are the people that disrupted things? And there was an article about Woodward and Bernstein. And when I saw their profile, that interested me. I said, wait, one guy's a Jew, the other guy's a WASP, one guy's a Republican, the other guy's a liberal. They don't really like each other. Their writing is very different. But they're forced to work together on this story. I said, well, that's interesting to me, the dynamic of these two guys. So I decided then that I would want to, if I was going to do a film, it would be about them and their profile. So I had to get their approval, which took a while. So
when it came time to cast a film, was Allan for casting well-known actors like yourself, or was he more on the side of finding unknowns to make it a little more believable? Well,
let me first of all just finish how it came about. For a month, I tried to get a hold of Woodward while I was filming, and he didn't return my calls. And I wasn't getting any traction at all. And finally, I get a call from Woodward, and he's very cold. And I said, look, I'm just wondering if I could talk to you and talk to your partner. I have an idea. He said, not now. It's not a good time. And some other time. And he blew me off. So I thought, well, okay. And then I let it go until James McCord wrote from jail a letter to Judge Sirica saying, I have to confess, we were hired by the committee to re-elect. And I said, whoa. So then I called Woodward back again. I said, hey, look, can you just give me 15 minutes so I can tell you what's on my mind? He said, yeah. He said, meet me in, can you get to Washington? I said, yeah. He said, get to the screening room. I'll meet you there. And I said, well, what do you look like? He said, I'll find you. So I go to this screening, which was a shitty screening. It was a shitty movie. And what was I doing there? And I was not there for the movie. I was there to find Woodward. Suddenly he was in my face, and he said, Woodward. And I said, oh. And he said, "Don't talk." He says, "Talk to me later." And I said, "Well, where?" He says, "Meet me at the Jefferson Hotel in 45 minutes. I'll be there." I said, "Okay." So I met him. Then he confessed that the reason I hadn't heard from him, they were very paranoid that he and Bernstein felt they were under investigation. They were under surveillance. Very paranoid. They were worried about the threat to the Washington Post. So we agreed to meet in my New York apartment later, and we would spend the whole day talking about what exactly was going on. And it was while the hearings were going on, so you could see how relevant it all was. Anyway, that's the story of how it came to me.
Mm. So when Alan came on board,
Yeah.
as far as the casting goes.
Casting. Well, so Hoffman turned out to be ideal. He was a wonderful actor. And I spent some time with him beforehand. And it was pretty clear that Dustin and I, being different, very different in so many ways, the one thing we had in common was a complete commitment to the craft. And I knew that he would take his job as an actor and an actor playing a particular role very seriously. And I counted on that because we were going to have to be opposites working together. So that's how it started out. As it turned out, as time went on, Dustin and I developed this relationship that was adversarial at first because it had to be. And then it became, as time went on, a friendship that became very deep between two actors.
Mm. We spoke to Steven Soderbergh about this film. It's one of his favorite films. Mm. And he was going on and on about the craftsmanship that Allan and Gordon Willis, the shooting of it, specifically a few scenes. I know there's like a 6 or 7 minute take where you're on the phone and the camera's slowly creeping in. And they use a special lens on it.
Diopter.
And it really locked you in, it seemed, when you were doing the role.
No,
Can you just take us through that scene?
Yeah, I'm very proud of that moment as an actor because it was almost 6 minutes and it was without cutaways, which meant you had to be there, you had to be really on it. And I had the job as Woodward of having to juggle 3 different things going on at the same time, different phones, and writing down at the same time. So it was a real acting challenge, which I appreciated. And Pakula was supportive enough with his cameraman, his crew, to say, okay, let's just move in and slightly to the side. So as we move in and get closer and closer and move off, we see in the background something else going on, this counter. If we can do that all in one take. And they said, well, we can do it if we have a diopter, which was a thing they created to be able to have you cross the line. But it was 6 minutes. We didn't have a lot of time. There was going to be time for another take because we were under budget constraints. So the pressure was really intense, which helped me as an actor, because I was under intense pressure as Woodward. I was hearing things that were amazing. And I realized that we were onto something that we had to move very, very quickly. So as an actor, I guess that's probably one of the acting moments I'm most proud of, career-wise.
Mm. What did you get from Woodward when it came time to cast Deep Throat, and how that interplay happened? He was having to not reveal so much, right, about who Deep Throat was and how the interaction happened.
Well, I remember at the time thinking we had gold there in terms of a movie with Deep Throat, because no one knew who he was. And I thought, God, I hope no one finds out before we make this movie, because that'll spoil a very important part of the movie. So a lot was built around Deep Throat, including photography, which goes to Gordon Willis and the role that he played, which was amazing. Pakula had worked with Willis on another project before that. A Clute. And Willis had a very strong concept that was very debatable at that time. He was very much about darkness, like The Godfather, and he was very, very dark. And a lot of people objected to that because you couldn't see eyes and so forth. And so I remember at the time, Pakula was very much dedicated to Gordon because of the past relationship. I felt that the value of Gordon was that he was going to create the darkness that the film needed. And that and he had such a wonderful concept. He's really a cinematographer that's greatly missed because of how he saw things. And he saw the newsroom as fluorescent lighting. There were no shadows, which meant that that's where you were struggling to get the truth. So the light was on the truth. Once you left the room, you went outside, it got dark. I just thought it was a great concept that Pakula went along with. Yeah. And then Gordon did all this amazing stuff, for example, to create that darkness, which allowed the music for the film to correspond, is that when we'd be outside, there'd be no lights. What he'd do is he'd wet the streets and have the car lights reflect the lights. And that's just that kind of genius thinking. I just thought he was terrific.
In the beginning of the film, it says a Redford Pakula film. So I'm just curious, were you as a producer always in sync with Alan and his choices throughout?
Yes, we were, yeah. It was a project that I founded, and therefore I was going to produce, and it was a struggle to get it produced because there was a lot of paranoia about it, including the studio. By that time, Nixon had resigned, and I said, well, we have to talk about what came before that. And they said, well, no one's going to care. I said, well, if you dig deep enough, it's really about a personal relationship that I think people don't know about. But it took a while to convince the studio, which was Warner Brothers, but they finally came on board. And then it was a question of getting the film made. You had to fight against the Washington Post itself, which didn't trust it. And at that time, Ben Bradley was very much indebted to Katharine Graham and the Post itself. So he was very protective of the Post and Katharine Graham. He was worried about what this film might do to their reputation. So getting him on board was a real struggle. I mean, he was really tough.
How was it after the film was over? Were you surprised at the reaction? Was Alan surprised at the reaction that it got Best Picture nomination?
We all were. Yeah, we were scared to death, or really not scared, just nervous when we had the first screening, because we knew that they were very much against this film being made. And we finally put it to them. Look, what are we going to say? What are we going to call it? The Washington Bulletin? I mean, it's the Washington Post. It's a character in the film. We can't call it something else. Because Katharine Graham did not want the film made. She was scared to death. So we finally said, look, we're going to make the film. We just want to make it authentic. So they came on board. And when I went to cast Jason Robards, that's a whole other story. For him to play Ben Bradley, he had to characterize certain Bradley characteristics, like the shirts that he wore and the fact that he always sat back like that. So when we had the screening at the MPA Hall, and all the Washington Post people came, we were nervous. They were suspicious. They were paranoid. And when the film opened up and Bradley was sitting there like this, and then Jason comes on like that, Bradley it's pretty great to watch. Anyway, the nice thing was that Katharine and everybody was very paranoid about it. When it was over, they were very pleased. So then I knew we were at least safe with their endorsement. The next question would be, what would the public? Didn't know.
Were you surprised at the reaction?
Which reaction?
Just the reaction in general, that it got the nominations.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
Alan now is known as having those three films, Parallax View, Clute, and All the President's Men, as like his Paranoia trilogy, they call it.
Huh.
It's kind of like...
Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
Did you ever have an opportunity to work with him again, or did you follow his career subsequent to that film?
I think we became friends, and we stayed connected as friends. I don't think the chance ever came up after that. I went to a different place after 3 days of the Candor. So I think that what Alan and I shared was this sense of paranoia about where the truth was. I think we shared that. And because he was very much into psychology, I think he had been heavily analyzed himself, and he had huge respect for psychiatry and psychology and so forth. So he would apply that to his work. It was very cerebral in many, many ways. And also was always trying to dig deep beneath paranoia about what was real and what wasn't real. And I think that was one of the values of Alan, that he brought to the table that sensibility, which I thought was really important for this film and something we could work together on.
I know you worked with Meryl Streep a lot in the 80s. She did Sophie's Choice with Alan. Did you ever talk to other actors about their experiences with Alan?
Mm-mm. No, it was just me and Alan. I didn't talk to any other actors.
You became friends with him, I guess, all through the 80s and 90s after All the President's Men?
Yeah. He came when we started our lab process in the 80s at Sundance. I asked him to come and be an advisor, and he did. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we maintained a friendship throughout.
What was your reaction when you heard about his unfortunate accident in the late 90s?
Well, to me, that's how life works. Sometimes the most bizarre things happen, and that was certainly bizarre. It like made no sense. But when you think of life in general, it probably made a lot of sense. A lot of accidents occur that make no sense, but that's life.
It seems to me like his career one of the reasons we're doing the film is because I don't think his career is as well known as it should be, and the important work he has done, from To Kill a Mockingbird, All the President's Men, Sophie's Choice. I mean, so many movies in his filmography mean so much, but no one really knows the name. I go around and I tell people I'm doing a Pakula project.
Well,
the name's kind of lost.
It is. I mean, I'm sorry about that. I feel the same way about. I feel the same way about George Roy Hill. I think that George Roy Hill, when you look at his work, same with Pakula. If you look at the body of their work, they're not getting the attention they deserve.
Why is that, do you think? Is it because they don't have a signature
style?
Yeah,
I think so. You have a lot of other directors who are well known and get a lot of media attention. They get a lot of critical attention, but they're sort of one note. But maybe that's why they get it.
Did Alan care about publicity for himself? Was he a self-promoter, or he cared more about the film?
Or the film. I think he knew the value of publicity because he'd been involved with it, but his heart was in the film itself, in filmmaking.
One of the ways he missed out, I guess, on an Oscar was the script for All the President's Men. William Goldman ended up taking it home, but I was just curious if you had a comment about that, because you guys worked on it so
well. That's tough because of my friendship with Goldman, which I don't want to demean. All I can tell you is that the history of it was that the script was written very quickly, and we pushed back on Bill to say, no, it's just, you got to go deeper, and asked him to go down to D.C., which he didn't do. And so he wrote another draft that wasn't acceptable, and it got to the Post, and they shot it down. Suddenly, the whole thing was going downhill, all because of that script. And then, to make it even worse, and which was not fair to Goldman, Bernstein and Nora Ephron, who they were together at that time, wrote a version of their own and turned it in. And that offended Bill so much that he said, I'm out. This is just too much. I mean, he was right. So we lost him at that point, and then going in different directions, we had no success, which finally led to Allan and I saying, hey, we know enough. Let's take Woodward and Bernstein's notes, because that's where the truth is. And that's where the heart of this film should be, so let's make it about that.
It's hard not to at least kind of wrap up here with what's happening currently, the current president, and the parallels with this story and what happened, and kind of like all this, new headlines about who knew what when, and it almost seems like we're heading to the same moment.
We are in the same moment. What do you mean heading? That's where somebody.
Right now, I feel like today is the day.
Come on, somebody asked me a while back, do you think this can ever happen again? And I said, it is now, in a more extreme way.
So does that get your antenna up to look for content currently and make something?
Well, I think not at the moment. I have other projects I'm involved with at the moment, but I think over time, we'll see how this settles out. But clearly, what's happening now that involves journalism, involves the truth. The truth is getting harder and harder to find because so many people are claiming the truth. And because we're now living in an environment we weren't quite in before, when you just had 3 or 4 channels giving you the news. Now there's so many. It's harder and harder to find the truth. And so many people are claiming to have it. And so the harder it gets, you say, well, where are you going to turn? So that's why, for me, journalism is under such threat because we're living in a soundbite world. And how do you dig the truth out when the attention span of the public is so narrow? Mm-hmm. And that's why I feel that documentaries are probably the new long-form journalism. To me, that's where you have a better chance of getting to the truth, because you can take a whole hour to tell a story. It gives you time to really go deeper into it rather than the soundbite world we're living in now.
Right. I don't want you to get political, but as you observe what's happening with Trump, does it feel like the mid-'70s all over again? Or is it much different in tone?
What do you mean the mid-'70s?
Well, just with Nixon and kind of what he was riding on, et cetera, and then how it all came
It's
about.
different. We're just living in such a different time. There was more that could be hidden then. There was more of a gap between where the power was and who didn't have the power now. And now I think there's so much that's exposed. It's very hard to keep things from being exposed. It's just harder. And so I just think that the time we're living in, I have a hunch that whatever's going on now is going to just keep bumbling forward, and the truth is just going to just worm its way out, and it's be so strong that will be the new headline. And I think whether if the truth is going in the direction it's going now, I don't think there will be a Trump. I think he will self-destruct, and all the king's men with him.
You do anticipate that?
If things keep going the way they are, yes, I do.
Would you allow a remake of this movie in 10 years, instead of mixing it with Trump?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people are talking about like doing something like this.
Well, I'll tell you one. I don't know if we have time for this, but what came to me a while back, years ago, through David Zaslav at Discovery, he asked if I would consider doing a revisit of All the President's Men. I said, no, I think that's done. I think that was a moment in time. Maybe you should just treat it like a museum piece, because it's not. That was a different time and different circumstances and so forth. No, I don't think so. And he kept pushing me. He said, would you reconsider? And I said, well, let me look at some archival footage. So I was looking at some archival footage of the hearings. And I saw this moment where it hit me like a ton of bricks. This is the reason to revisit it. And that was where the panel, there was the investigative panel, was questioning John Dean about Nixon. And I realized, wait a minute, that panel is made up of Republicans and Democrats combined. And they're all aligned with each other to get to the truth. There was a time. We don't have that now. We're so polarized. And we have ideological rigidity on either side. They won't give in, they won't give up. You don't get anybody talking to each other. As soon as somebody said, well, why are you doing this? They go, Jing! And they slam the door shut. So we, the public, are not benefiting. We're losing. And as long as this keeps on, we're going to continue to lose unless someone from either side decides, hey, let's talk to each other, and let the public hear that conversation.
Which side was Allan leaning on politically, would you say?
Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
But he also wanted to hide that fact. He wanted to be fair-minded. And going back to Robards, if I can for a second, I just want to say something, because that to me was about payback, which made me very happy. Years earlier, when I was just starting my career, I was on a Channel 13 production of The Iceman Cometh. And Eugene O'Neill's piece was now going to be brought to television. It had been at the Circle Theater in New York, and Jason had been playing the role of Hickey, the main character. The way it was originally written was much softer and weaker than what Jason brought to the part. So he basically rejuvenated the power of that play, which then led to Long Day's Journey and Night and so forth. So he became a real character representing O'Neill. And because of my Irish heritage, I had a strong connection to O'Neill because my grandfather had known O'Neill. My grandfather was a musician in New London, Connecticut, and he knew O'Neill. Anyway, there's history there. Then there's Jason. When we were doing The Iceman Cometh, I had to play this character that's very weak and is guilt-ridden, and in the end is encouraged to commit suicide. And I do. And so there's a moment when Hickey comes into the room and he spots me, and he says, he senses something in my character that's deep within his character, a cowardice. Anyway, we're doing it, and because it was one of my first roles as an actor on television, I was kind of ignored for the most part. And Sidney Lumet, who was a terrific director, was directing it, and so Robards befriended me on that set. He befriended me. Turned out that we'd been from a similar place in Southern California. I went to high school with his younger sister. We had connections that were similar, plus the Irish connection to O'Neill and so forth. He was very kind to me at a time when not many people were, because I was sort of not really significant. But because he was very kind to me, I never forgot it. And so years later, when his drinking got him into trouble and he had a terrible accident and was partially disfigured and had kind of rebuilt, he was no longer considered eligible for work. And so no one was going to hire him in Hollywood. And so when this film came up, and I said, I would like him to play Ben Bradley, because I knew there were such similarities. that he would really do Ben Bradley justice. People were against it. And they said, no, he's not workable anymore. And I said, well, I won't do it without him.
Was Allan against it?
No, he was not against it. I think he saw someone else at that time. I can't remember who it was, but he was not against it, but he wasn't fully on it. And so I had to push, I had to lobby hard, and I finally was able to bring Allan around, so he really saw, but the studio, no, And I said, well, look, finally, this was payback time for me. I won't do it if you don't cast him.
Wow.
And so we did, and you saw what he did. It was just a terrific performance.
Yeah, and went on to win an Oscar, right, for that role.
I'm sorry?
He won an Oscar for the role, too.
Did he?
Yeah.
Well, he deserved it. Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you very much. That was
You're welcome.
excellent.
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Before you go.